Well, we're in a sermon series all summer long, Summer Witness, and it's divided into 4 sections of 4 sermons each. We're just ending the first section, talking about discipling younger generations. 3 weeks ago, Steve was up here. We talked about discipling teenagers. 2 weeks ago, John Lewis was with us, talked about discipling preteens. Last Sunday, Pastor Tyler was here. It talked about discipling young adults. And today I'm talking about discipling preschoolers, which at first I thought, wait a minute, where is this going to go? But as I got into it, I'm really excited about it. I think the basic overall objective is that we can disciple preschoolers by instilling in them some basic rules for living. And when I'm talking about instilling in them basic rules for living, I'm not just talking about telling them about them, but also demonstrating them through what we do. Because it's not just through saying that is going to really affect them. There's the expression that actions speak louder than words, and that is true. A couple of weeks ago when Pastor John was with you, he talked about preteens, and he said that they are just like sponges. And I think the same thing could be said about preschoolers, where they just absorb everything. And if we're around preschool kids, we are discipling them, whether we think we are or not, because they are watching us. And it's not just what we say, but it's what we do. If we're in earshot, if we're in eyeshot of preschoolers, they are learning from us. So we're constantly discipling people just through our actions. There's an expression, share the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. And that's the same thing. We cannot rely upon, do what I say, not what I do. That doesn't work. Our actions will speak for us. And so as we get into this and talk about these 5 different rules for basic living, remember, it's primarily what we do that communicates to other people what we're trying to communicate. So the first basic rule for living is, and I just put down, do unto others. I was kind of thinking that you might be able to fill it out for me. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yes, Luke chapter 6, verse 31. And Jesus states this very clearly. And it's something that young people can understand. We're basically saying, how do you want people to treat you? That's the way you should treat other people. And we should also do that through our own actions. We need to be treating people the way we would like to be treated too. Because remember, we communicate in that way how we should treat other people. And this whole thing, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, we know it as the Golden Rule. And the Golden Rule, actually, there's a form of the Golden Rule in about every major religion that there is. There's a chart up on the wall. I know that you can't read each little Golden Rule underneath it, but everyone has something. I think in the very lower, kind of in the right-hand kind of corner, there's a cross there. That's a Golden Rule of Christianity. Due left. You see the menorah, that's the Jewish Golden Rule. Above that, there's Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Many of the main religions of the world have a form of the Golden Rule. Now, Christianity is a little bit unique because all the other religions state it in a negative form. In other words, they say, don't do to others the things that you don't want them to do to you. But Jesus gives that positive spin. Do to others as you would have them do unto you. And again, we communicate that through young people, through our own actions when we treat other people the way we would like to be treated. In Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is asked, what's a great commandment? He says, love the Lord your God, but the second's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And again, it really connects with this Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We need to treat other people the way we would like to be treated. And we see St. Paul writes a little bit about this in Galatians chapter 5. And he talks about the fact that if you do this, love your neighbor as yourself, all the rules and laws and traditions of Moses are fulfilled in that. Now, St. Paul is the one that knew the law of Moses very well. He was a Pharisee. That was their whole bag. They studied the law. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, especially, the Deuteronomy, second giving of the law, and all the traditions, and Leviticus and Numbers. And he knew them very well. He studied in the best school ever. He studied under Gamaliel, who is the teacher of the century, just about. And so Paul knew what the Old Testament law said. But when he then made that leap, when Jesus Christ encountered him on the road to Damascus and he became a follower of Jesus Christ, he said all the law can be summed up in that one word, love. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, James, Jesus' next oldest brother, James, who ruled in the early Christian church in Jerusalem along with St. Peter, James also held up this love your neighbor as yourself. He called it the royal law. And he said, if you follow this, love your neighbor as yourself, you can't go wrong. Well, he states it in the positive, you are doing right. But basically, it's what we say, you cannot go wrong if you follow this. So this first rule, basic rule for living that is best learned when you're very young is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, the second rule then is don't steal. And we can get to that from Exodus chapter 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5. Look at the commandments. Seventh commandment, do not steal. You shall not steal. And it's just a fundamental rule that we need to learn. We need to learn it young. I need to tell a personal story about myself. And along this whole line of not stealing, it was a few years ago that I stole a truck, and the theft was discovered, and I suffered the consequences for that stealing of that truck. Now, to the best of my memory, this is what the truck looked like. It was actually a red fire engine, a toy fire engine, and I actually, the theft happened when I was just a little George, and this truck was awesome. It had movable parts, and for any young kid, boys especially, movable parts, the more the better. And the situation was, there's a guy that lived about half a block from where I lived, down Stewart Avenue, and I was over at his house playing, and he had this truck, and I just needed to have it, so I brought it home. I'm an only child, so is Pastor Tyler. And I tell you, us only children, we get bad rap. They always say, only children, they don't know, they never learn to share. Now, I can't, I had decided that this kid was going to share his truck with me on a permanent basis. So, I knew about sharing, so don't give me that. So I brought the truck home. It was awesome. And my mom notices it because she knows that she didn't get it. My dad didn't get it for me in this, big, awesome truck. And he said, well, where'd this come from? And I explained to her, it used to belong to the guy down the street, but now it's mine. And actually, in my mind at that time, I thought, if you wanted something that much, it really should be yours. I don't know if it was the precursor to name it and claim it or something. I thought, this is mine. And I was trying to explain this concept to my mom, but she had a whole different concept altogether, which had to do with stealing, and you can't take something that belongs to someone else. And sure enough, fire truck under one arm, holding my mom's hand. She walked me down the half block down Stewart Avenue. I had to knock on the door. The mom came to the door. The kid was kind of behind her. And I had to apologize. I'm sorry, I took your son's truck. I mean, that was bad. But the worst part was I actually had to give the truck back. So, I learned early on the whole thing about not stealing. I like to say then the next week my parents got me a truck just like it. Didn't happen. They thought the best gift was the lesson learned. And, it is really difficult growing up and having smart parents that have good values, because they just don't let you get by with anything. We need to respect other people, and we need to respect what they have. And again, we need to demonstrate that through our own lives as well. If we are trying to communicate don't steal to young people, we have to live it in our own life as well. I learned something from my dad, and it was a lesson that I learned when he didn't know he was teaching it. Again, remember I said we're teaching, we're discipling young people all the time, even when we don't know. And I don't know how old I was at the time. I remember being in the garage. My dad was in the garage. He was talking to another adult. I don't know if it was my mom or someone else or what it was, but I remember the conversation he was saying. And he said that he had borrowed or he had lent a tool to a neighbor. And the neighbor, I don't know if it was a garden tool or what it was, but the neighbor never gave it back and didn't look like he was going to give it back. And I remember my dad, who was pretty mild-mannered, saying, what kind of person, would borrow something from you and never return it? Now, I was that sponge at that time. My dad he didn't sit me down and say, George, okay, this is about lending and borrowing. This is how this whole thing works. I was just listening to him talk to someone else. I don't even know if he really registered, here, George is here and he's learning. But I remember I learned that lesson. If I'm going to borrow something from someone, I am going to be sure to give it back. And if I'm going to borrow, say I need it for like a couple days, at the end of the 2 days, I'm going to be giving it back on a timely basis. It was a lesson I learned very young, not because any lecture was delivered, but because I was there, eyes open, ears open, and absorbing. We need to be careful because we are teaching all the times. We disciple preschoolers and all people through what we say and through what we do. Hebrews chapter 13, the writer of Hebrews says, be content with what we have, and I think that goes hand in hand with, do not steal. The more that we're content with what we have, the less we're always looking for what someone else has and wanting it for ourselves. So that's that second rule, don't steal. The third rule is take responsibility. And again, this is important. We don't have to go very far into the Bible to find an illustration of this taking responsibility. If we start reading in Genesis, by the time we get to the 3rd chapter, there it is. Adam and Eve, God places them in the Garden of Eden. And kind of fits in with Galen's little story. But Adam and Eve are set in the Garden of Eden, and God says, you can eat from any tree in the entire garden. And there's a lot of great fruit here, and it's the smorgasbord of all smorgasbords. But this one tree right in the center, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't eat from that. But anything else, that's okay. Well, sure enough, we know the story. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, then God encounters Adam, and he says, Adam, have you eaten from the tree that I told you you're not to eat fruit from? His response, the woman, see where we're going here, not me, the woman, but if you really look closely, Adam is not taking responsibility here. He's deflecting it not only to Eve, it's her fault, but the woman that you gave me, it's not my fault. I'm not taking responsibility. And if you hadn't given her to me, really, it's your fault that I ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See how that responsibility is just kind of the pass the buck? If you were God, right then you would have just smashed Adam there and said, I made a mistake there. I can make a better man than him, But that didn't happen. He apparently put up with Adam. But then he turns to Eve and he says, what is this you've done? And then Eve saying, well, not me. It was the serpent that deceived me, and then I ate. I told you I'm only child. If there was blame, I couldn't really blame anyone else. I was the only one. But I'd been at other. I people's houses all my life, that had brothers and sisters, and I saw it happen. Parents blame the oldest. You did this, and they say, well, it wasn't me, it was her. And then, no, it was him. And then there's no more kids left, and the youngest, well, it's the dog. The dog is going, what? But passing the buck, passing along, the same thing. We see Eve saying, it was a serpent. The serpent, of course, doesn't have any arms or legs, can't really point to anyone else. But we need to take responsibility for the things that we do. And we need to communicate that that's an important concept to know, and the younger you know it, the better it is for you. And we need to demonstrate in our own lives by us taking responsibility as well. There's an expression that says, he made me do it. I tell you, I just kind of grimace when I hear that, because when you think about it, no one makes us do anything. We make choices. You heard Galen saying the same thing. We make choices, and we may have pressure on us, may have influence on us, but we make the choice. We need to take the responsibility, and we need to also communicate to that young people. I used to think that farmers were a vacation activity that you went to visit. Situation was, I grew up in suburban Chicago. My dad was a foreman in a factory, and the factory would close down for 2 weeks around the 4th of July. And they told everyone that worked in the factory, you get 2 weeks vacation, you can take it any time you want during the year, as long as it's the 2 weeks that were closed down during the 4th of July. So that was our vacation. And my dad's relatives all lived in South Dakota, north of Sioux Falls. That's where my grandfather at age 13 and his father settled when they came over from Norway, 1873. Anyway, so for vacation, my mom and dad would load the family up in the car. That would be me and the rest of the family. And we'd drive to South Dakota and we'd visit farmers. I thought that farming was set up for people to, that was vacation. My other friends are going to Wisconsin Dells, Riverside Amusement Park in the Chicagoland area. I'm visiting farmers. So we were there. I remember one occasion, we decided to go shopping in the big city of Sioux Falls. And so we're shopping, and I guess we're going to take a break, and we go to some sort of a cafe or something, eating place, and we all have Cokes. And it was the old soda fountain thing, and I had my Coke glass that kind of shaped up, and then there was a straw in it and everything. And while people are talking, I'm not talking, I'm just a kid, the adults are talking, I think I reached for something, and my arm hit the straw and tipped the Coke all over the table. Well, my mom, kind of only kid, didn't raise him right. He had to explain to me, you shouldn't have the straw in there because it can tip over. I mean, I knew that. I saw it happen right before me. But she explained it all to me and everything. Okay, I won't. So, no straw. Okay. We go shopping another couple hours or so, and then we're going to take another break. I guess shopping is exhausting or something. I don't know about that much. So we stop, and we'll all get Cokes again. Here I have my Coke, no straw, so I don't tip it over, idiot George, And so the adults are talking, and my mom is kind of gesturing, and her arm goes out and hits the straw in her Coke, and it tumbles over and spills over the whole table. And I looked at her, and she looked at, there was the eye contact. I was smart enough to keep my big fat mouth shut. But the eye contact mine said, you shouldn't have a straw in your cup, your glass, because you can knock it over. And her eye contact is, I know, I did the same thing. I mean, she was taking no words were spoken, but the eye said, I know, I did it. It's important for us to take responsibility for our own actions. Well, the fourth rule that for living we really need to communicate is to forgive others. Now, I don't believe it's too young for preschoolers to learn the Lord's Prayer. It's important to start communicating things. But when we teach the Lord's Prayer, probably some definition of some terms might be helpful, because when we teach a preschooler, and really even middle schooler and above, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Quite frankly, I've been around for a while. I've never used the term trespass in a sentence the way it's used in the Lord's Prayer. I mean, for me, if you trespass, that means you go on someone's property that's posted, no trespassing. You're trespassing. But long ago, it used to mean if you trespassed against someone, you did something wrong to them. So maybe going to Matthew chapter 6 and seeing where the Lord's Prayer came from originally, talking about forgive us our debts, maybe that helps and maybe not. Luke 11, the other place where the Lord's Prayer is, forgive us our sins. But explaining that, we should forgive other people when they do something against us. It's interesting in Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 and 15. Jesus explains part of the Lord's Prayer, but the only part he explains is just one part, and it's about forgiving. And he says, if you forgive others when they do something against you, God is going to forgive you. But if you don't forgive others when they do something against you, God isn't going to forgive you. And again, that's important to communicate to young people. But we mainly communicate it through our own actions. If we are forgiving, then they're going to see that. If we're not forgiving, they are going to learn that from us. It's interesting, Matthew chapter 18, Peter and Jesus are walking along, and Peter says, how many times does my brother have to do something against me and I still forgive him? I don't know if Peter was talking about his biological brother Andrew, or if he's talking about just people in general, but Jesus, the response was, it doesn't make any difference how many times. You always forgive. And again, it's important that we use that example in our lives so that we can demonstrate that. Jesus demonstrated this truth. Luke chapter 23, when he's on the cross. And after being gone through a terrible whipping, and the trauma involved with that, and then being nailed to a cross and hanging up there, he's looking down at those people that put him on the cross. And he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Boy, if Jesus could have forgiven them for putting him on the cross, boy, is there anything that we can't forgive other people, when they do something against us. So forgiveness is something that we really need to communicate. And the fifth and final rule for living is to love God. And we have, again, Jesus, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. We said also the second's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. But he's saying that's the most important, to love God. And that, again, we communicate that to young people through our lives. If it's not clear that God's number one in our life, that's not going to really translate very well to young people, even if we tell them. If we say, okay, hey, let's go to the commandments and see what it says. Exodus 20, Deuteronomy chapter 5. What's the first commandment? I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. It says God should be first. But if God is not first in our lives, then, what will that say to them? There was a interchange between Jesus and Peter. This happened after Jesus was crucified, after he rose from the dead. Jesus is with Peter and the other disciples along a beach. And it comes to us from John chapter 21. And Jesus asked Peter, Peter, do you love me more than these? Now, these, we don't, it's hard to tell. Was he saying, do you love me more than these, your buddies, the other disciples here? Or, Peter, do you love me more than these, the boats and the nets and your previous occupation as a fisherman? We don't know. But he says, do you love me more than anything else, I guess? And Peter says, yes, I do, Lord. And Jesus says, feed my lambs. I imagine that Peter thought, what? Where does that come from? But then Jesus asks the same question again. Peter, do you love me more than these? He's kind of like, I kind of asked and answered here, Lord, didn't you hear me the first time? Yes, I do love you more. And Jesus says, take care of my sheep. And then much to Peter's discomfort, Jesus asks a third time, Peter, do you love me more than these? And Peter says, you know I do. You know it, Lord. And he says, feed my sheep. Now, pastors and preachers have talked about this. Oh, that the first feed my lambs means this and take care of my sheep and whatever. I think mainly it says, if you love God, if you love Jesus Christ, then that your life has to show it as you interact with people around you. And that the greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul, is interlinked with love your neighbor as yourself. And I think Jesus says very clearly that you can't love others without loving God. And that's the message that we communicate to young people, that God is number one in our lives. We love God, but we also love others around us. And we communicate, and remember, as we communicate, we're discipling whether we know it or not. We always are on that pedestal. We're on that platform. Whenever we're around young people, they're watching us and they're learning from us. So the question isn't, are we going to disciple them or not? The question is, how will we disciple? What kind of influence will we have on them? Let us pray.